The last time I drove down Millbrook Road, I was 18 years old, with a trunk full of scholarship paperwork and a one-way ticket out of a house that had never really felt like home. I remember looking in the rearview mirror and telling myself I wouldn't cry. I didn't. That was 7 years ago. I didn't call ahead when I flew back. I didn't text. I didn't give anyone the chance to clean up, rearrange, or prepare a version of themselves they wanted me to see. I had 4 days off between contract rotations. I work in medical device sales, which means I live out of a suitcase and answer emails at midnight, and something kept pulling me back. Not nostalgia. Something closer to dread. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone and doesn't move no matter how many times you tell yourself everything is fine. My flight landed in Columbus at 6:40 inches the morning. I rented a car at the airport because I didn't want anyone picking me up. I stopped at a gas station, bought a black coffee I barely touched, and drove the 40 minutes to Clover Falls on autopilot. The town looks exactly the same as it always did. The same diner on Route 9. The same Presbyterian church with the broken letter on the sign out front that's been broken since I was in middle school. Same water tower. Same everything. I pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in at 8:14 inches the morning. My mother's car wasn't there. Neither was my brother's truck. I figured they'd gone out early. It wasn't unusual. My mother has always moved fast in the morning, errands stacked before noon, and my brother, he's 3 years older than me, still living at home at 31, a fact no one in the family seemed to find alarming, was probably with her. I used my old key. It still worked. The house was quiet, in a way that felt different from empty. I stood in the entryway for a moment and just listened. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked somewhere down the hall, but there was something else, something I couldn't name yet. A heaviness in the air, like a room that hadn't been opened in a while. I set my bag down and walked into the kitchen. The counter had mail stacked on it. Not the organized pile my mother kept near the fruit bowl, a messy, unattended stack, some of it sliding onto the floor. 2 coffee mugs in the sink, one with mold growing on the inside. A trash can that hadn't been emptied. A pill organizer on the table, with a full week of compartments untouched. I picked up the pill organizer. Read the label. My father's name. The medications were for his heart. I knew about the heart condition he'd been diagnosed 2 years ago, with a moderate arrhythmia, nothing immediately dangerous, but something that required daily management. He was supposed to take 3 medications every morning. The organizer in my hand had 7 full days of pills. All of them sitting there, all of them not taken. I stood very still in that kitchen, for a long moment. Then I called my father's cell phone. It rang 4 times, and went to voicemail. I called my mother. It rang twice and went to voicemail. I called my brother. Same thing. I stood there in the kitchen with the pill organizer in my hand and a feeling I can only describe as the floor dropping out from underneath me while the floor itself stayed completely solid. A dissociation. Before and after, with no visible line between them. I started going through the mail. Most of it was junk, but there was an envelope from Mercy Regional Medical Center. It had been opened. I pulled the letter out. It was a notification about an inpatient admission. My father's name. Admission date 11 days ago. 11 days. I read the letter 3 times. Then, I set it down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are shaking, and you don't want them to be. I drove to Mercy Regional in 11 minutes. I have no memory of the traffic lights. At the front desk, I told them my father's name. The woman at the desk looked at her screen, then looked at me, and there was something in her expression, a careful neutrality, that told me, before she said a single word, that what was coming was not going to be small. She asked if I was family. I said I was his daughter. She picked up a phone and called someone, and within 3 minutes, a woman in blue scrubs was walking me down a hallway to a family consultation room, which is the kind of room hospitals only take you to when the news requires a chair. My father had been admitted 11 days ago, after collapsing at the hardware store 2 miles from our house. A customer had called 911. He had been brought in by ambulance. He had gone into cardiac arrest in the emergency department and had been resuscitated. He was currently in the cardiac ICU, sedated, on a ventilator. The nurse, her name was Patrice, and I will never forget her for the rest of my life, sat across from me and explained his condition clearly and carefully. He had experienced a serious arrhythmia event. His heart had stopped. They had gotten it beating again. He was stable, but critical. The ventilator was breathing for him while his body recovered. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but could not make promises. I asked who had been listed as his emergency contact. She said my mother's name. I asked if my mother had been notified. She said yes. My mother had been called the night he was admitted. She had come to the hospital that first evening, spoken with the attending physician, and signed some paperwork. She had not returned since. I need you to understand what I felt in that moment. Not anger, not yet. What I felt was something colder and quieter than anger. It was the sensation of a thing you have always half known, suddenly becoming fully, undeniably real. My mother had known my father was in the cardiac ICU on a ventilator for 11 days, and she had not called me. I asked Patrice if I could see him. She walked me to his room herself. He looked smaller than I remembered. People always say that about hospital beds, that the people in them look smaller, and I used to think it was a cliché until I was standing at the foot of my father's bed, watching his chest rise and fall, because a machine was making it do that. He had a tube in his throat, lines in his arms, a monitor beside his bed with numbers I had enough medical-adjacent knowledge to half read and half dread. I sat down in the chair next to his bed, and I held his hand and I talked to him. I don't remember everything I said. I told him I was there. I told him I wasn't leaving. I told him he needed to fight, because I had a lot of things I still wanted to say to him in person, and I was not ready to say them to a headstone. I stayed for 2 hours. Then I went back to the house. I called my mother again. This time, she picked up. The background noise when she answered was unmistakable. Poolside chatter, music. The particular echo of an outdoor space with water nearby. She sounded relaxed in a way that hit me like something physical. I said, "Where are you?" She said, "Oh, honey, I was going to call you soon. We're in Scottsdale. Your brother surprised me for my birthday. We've been here since." I said, "Dad is in the ICU on a ventilator and has been there for 11 days. Silence. Then, I know. I spoke to the doctors when he went in. They said he was stable. Stable and critical, I said. Those are not the same word. I needed this trip, she said. I have been exhausted. You don't understand what it's been like here. I want to be precise about what she said next, because I have replayed it many times and I want to make sure I am not misremembering it in a way that makes it worse than it was. She said, "Your father has been difficult for years. You've been away. You don't see it. I needed a break." I asked when she was planning to come back. She said they had 3 more days booked. I said, "He could die in 3 days." She said, "The doctors said he was stable." My brother got on the phone. He said, "Don't be dramatic. He's being taken care of. There's nothing we can do sitting in a waiting room." He said the hotel was non-refundable. He said they'd be back by the weekend. I hung up. I sat in my father's kitchen for a long time after that. I looked at the pill organizer. I looked at the stack of mail. I looked at the 2 mugs in the sink with the mold on the inside, and I thought about the fact that my father had lived in this house for 34 years, and apparently no one had checked on him in at least a week before he collapsed. Then I made a phone call to my father's bank. Here is something most people don't know. If you are listed on a bank account even as a secondary holder, even on an account you haven't touched in years, you have certain rights with respect to that account. When I left for college, my father had added me to his primary checking account for emergencies. My mother was also on that account. So were the automatic payments for utilities, the mortgage, and a number of other household bills. I had my father's account information. I was a listed account holder. I called the bank, went through verification, and requested that discretionary access be suspended for all non-essential transactions above a certain threshold pending a review. It wasn't a full freeze. It was a flag. But it was enough. I also called the management company for the credit card my brother used. A card under my parents' account that my brother had been an authorized user on for, as far as I could tell, the last 6 years, without any apparent plan to get his own. I removed his authorized user status. Then I called my father's attorney. I had found her card in his desk drawer 3 years ago when I was looking for stamps, and I had stored her number in my phone without ever expecting to use it. I told her who I was. I told her my father was incapacitated in the ICU and had been for 11 days with no family present. I asked if there was a healthcare power of attorney on file and whether I was listed anywhere on his estate documents. She asked me to come in the next morning. That evening, I went back to the hospital and sat with my father again. The overnight nurse, a quiet man named Gerald, who moved through the room with an efficiency that was somehow also gentle, told me my father had responded slightly to pain stimuli that afternoon, which was a positive sign. He told me that having family present made a difference. He told me this not as a pleasantry but as a clinical observation, and I believed him. I told my father about the drive from Columbus, about the gas station coffee, about the broken church sign that was still broken. I told him about the pill organizer. I said it casually, like it wasn't the thing that had cracked something open in my chest. I sat with him until almost midnight, then went back to the house and slept in my childhood bedroom for the first time in 4 years. My phone started ringing at 7:20 the morning. My mother. I let it ring. My brother. I let it ring. My mother again. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. When I finally looked at the messages at 8:30, there were 14 of them. The first few were confused. The middle ones were frustrated. By the end, they were angry in a way that was so familiar, it almost felt like coming home in a different sense, that particular brand of family anger that dresses itself up as concern and expects to be received as love. One message from my brother said, "What did you do to the card? I'm trying to pay for breakfast." One from my mother said, "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but this is not the way to handle things." One from my brother said, "Call me back right now." I texted back once. I said, "Dad is in cardiac ICU on a ventilator. He has been there for 11 days. Come home." I went to meet my father's attorney. Her name was Margaret, and she was the kind of lawyer who kept her office neat in a way that felt intentional, like neatness was itself a professional position. She had a photograph on her desk of a chocolate Labrador. She offered me water, and I took it. She walked me through the documents. My father had updated his estate planning 2 years ago, around the time of his heart diagnosis. He had made changes that no one else in the family appeared to know about. His primary healthcare proxy, the person with legal authority to make medical decisions if he was incapacitated, was not my mother. It was me. He had also listed me as executor of his estate and had made me the primary beneficiary of his life insurance policy, with a notation in the file that said the decision had been made after careful consideration and that it reflected his wishes as of the date of signing. Margaret had witnessed it herself. I sat with that for a moment. My father had done this 2 years ago and had never told me. I think about why he might not have told me, and I think the answer is that he knew how it would land in the house, and he wanted to protect me from that landing for as long as possible. Or maybe he just hoped he'd never need me to know, that things would be different, that people change. Margaret gave me copies of everything. She walked me through what my role as healthcare proxy meant in practical terms. She made sure I understood what decisions I could and could not make, what conversations I needed to have with his medical team, what documentation I needed to provide to the hospital. I drove back to Mercy Regional with a folder of legal documents and a very specific kind of quiet in my head. The attending cardiologist met with me that afternoon. His name was Dr. Okafor, and he explained my father's condition with the directness I had needed since the moment I walked into that hospital. The arrhythmia had been severe. The cardiac arrest had deprived his brain of oxygen for approximately 4 minutes before resuscitation, not long enough to cause definitive damage, but long enough to require careful monitoring. They were planning to begin reducing sedation the following morning to assess neurological function. It was a critical window. They needed family present. I said, "I am family. I am here." My mother and brother arrived that evening. They had not come because I asked them to. They had come, as best I could tell, because the credit card situation had become genuinely inconvenient. They looked tan. My brother had a new watch. My mother's carry-on bag had a hotel tag still attached to the handle. We met in the hospital parking lot, which was not planned but also, somehow, exactly right. My mother said, "You had no right." I said, "I have healthcare proxy." She stopped. I said it again, more quietly. I have healthcare proxy. Dad updated his documents 2 years ago. I've been in contact with his attorney and his medical team since yesterday morning. Doctor, Okafor is expecting us upstairs. There is a lot to discuss about his treatment plan, and I need both of you there because the decisions that get made in the next 48 hours matter. My brother said, "That's not possible." I said, "I have the documents in the car if you'd like to see them." He did not say anything after that. We went upstairs. We sat with Dr. Okafor. We listened as he laid out the plan for the next phase of my father's care, the sedation reduction, the neurological assessment, the cardiac interventions being considered to prevent another event. My mother cried at one point, and I believe the tears were real. I want to be fair about that. I do not think she stopped loving my father. I think she found loving him exhausting, and I think she confused exhaustion with permission to disappear. I don't know how to forgive that yet. I'm working on it. The sedation reduction began the next morning. I was in the room. The first sign was his right hand. His fingers moved. Small, almost imperceptible, but Gerald noticed and said, "There we go," in a voice so quiet it was almost to himself. By afternoon, my father's eyes were open. Not fully, not focused, but open. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then his eyes moved and found my face, and something shifted in them. Recognition is not the right word for what I saw, or maybe recognition is exactly the right word, and I just can't stand how much it means. I leaned forward and said, "Hi, Dad. I'm here. You're okay. I'm right here." He couldn't speak with the tube, but his hand moved toward mine, and I took it and held it, and the monitor next to his bed kept beeping steadily, and Gerald made a note on his chart, and outside the window, the Ohio sky was doing that late afternoon thing, where the light goes gold and quiet, and everything looks like it's being handled gently. He was extubated 4 days later. The first full sentence he said to me, the morning after extubation, in a voice like gravel and rust from 2 weeks of not being used, was, "You came back." I said, "Of course I came back." He said, "I didn't want you to see this." I said, "I know, but I needed to." We sat with that for a while. The room was warm, and it smelled like a hospital, which is never a good smell, but I had stopped noticing it by then, the way you stop noticing a thing that has simply become the landscape of your days. He spent 3 more weeks in the hospital before he was stable enough to be discharged. I rearranged my contract schedule and worked remotely from Clover Falls for most of that time. My manager was understanding in the way that people are when you explain the situation plainly and don't ask for more than you need. The conversations with my mother were hard and are ongoing. There are things she has said that I believe she means, and things she has said that I believe she means right now in this moment, but may not be able to sustain. I am trying to hold that difference carefully, rather than let it collapse into either too much hope or too much cynicism. My brother has found an apartment. This is progress. My father came home on a Tuesday. I was there when the discharge transport pulled into the driveway. I had cleaned the house the day before, really cleaned it, the kind of cleaning that is also a form of saying something you don't have the words for. I had emptied the trash, washed the mugs, set up his new pill organizer, the one from the pharmacy with the large print labels, on the kitchen table where the light is good in the morning. He stood in the entryway of his own house for a moment, the way I had stood in it 7 weeks earlier, just listening. Then he looked at me and said, "The garden." I said, "I know. We'll fix it in the spring." He said, "Together?" I said, "Together." That evening, I sat on the back porch with him, and we watched the yard go dark, the way it does in Ohio in the fall, when the light leaves fast, and suddenly the edges of things disappear. He asked me about my job. I asked him about his physical therapy schedule. We talked about the neighbor's dog who had started coming through the fence gap that nobody had fixed yet. We talked about a lot of small things in the way that you talk about small things when the large things have been too close and too loud for too long, and you need the weight of ordinary life to settle back around you. At some point, he reached over and patted my hand once, the way he used to when I was young, and didn't know how to receive that kind of thing. I knew how to receive it now. I have thought a lot about what it means to come home. Before this, I would have told you that I had left Clover Falls deliberately, and that I did not think of it as home in any active sense. A place you come from is not the same as a place you belong to. I believed that. I think what I know now is something different. Home is not a constant. It's a decision you make over and over, in small ways and sometimes in very large ones. It's a phone call you make when something in your chest tells you to. It's a key that still works in a lock 7 years later. It's sitting next to a hospital bed in the dark, talking about a broken church sign to a man who may or may not be able to hear you, but who is, against real odds, still there. I fly back out in 2 weeks. I have already booked my return flight for November and December. I have not decided yet what else changes the job, the travel, the question of how close or far to be. Those are decisions that don't need to be made all at once. For now, there is this porch and this yard going dark, and this man beside me who came back from somewhere very far away and chose, whatever it means, to stay. For now, that is enough.